Once upon a dream. Void. The prince and princess traveled down the path in silence. Philip put his arm out for her to hold, and Aurora Rose tried to ignore it but finally accepted it, giving in to her present state and tendency to stagger. She kept replaying the last few seconds in which she had killed the demon. It was harder to drive the sword into the thing's body than she had imagined it would be, but it was still perhaps easier than it would have been with a real human. Would there have been more resistance? Would she have been more hesitant? Would the fact that it was an actual person have stayed her handsome? Or had this past few days changed her more than all her years in either reality? Philip was complicated now. She didn't want to think about him. His feelings for her were unbearably strong. His treatment for her in the forest cottage had been undominable, or had it? Wasn't it just the way he would inevitably wind up, considering his life experiences up to that point? Did he have any reason to trust a random girl in the forest with the truth? But didn't he love her? She didn't want to think about it. It seemed like wherever she was, whoever she was, Aurora/Briar Rose was some sort of maelstrom of deceit, causing all who had come near her to lie. For the first time she wished she was out of the dream world. Immediately. She wanted to wake up and see the actual world and face people and make them face her. She was exhausted. She wanted to slaw off all the layers of falsehoods, like the tired gray skin of a snake. "How close are we?" she mumbled, finally breaking the silence. "It's a little confusing around here. There are rocks, large ones, not that far ahead, I believe." Philip answered, carefully, trying to keep his voice neutral, not wanting to seem overeager or grateful for the attention she was showing him, not wanting to scare her away. "As soon as we see them, it should be a straight shot to the house, alongside the little stream." "I remember those." Immediately another flood of memories pummeled her. She gasped, forced herself to keep walking. Now it was like a valve she turned on and couldn't close all the way. Even when the initial burst was over, the images continued to trickle in, never ending. She could feel the rocks. She had climbed on them. She had rubbed her hands on them. She had found darker rocks in the stream, and she would draw on them. She had balanced on the rocks. She had pretended she was an eagle nesting on them. "Get down! Ladies don't act like that!" Flora had yelled, catching her once. The other aunts had looked at their leader with skeptical faces. "Well, I mean, they don't. She wouldn't be able to when, you know." She continued in a way that hadn't made sense until now. "Maybe if more princesses climbed on rocks, the world wouldn't be in a state it's in," Merryweather remarked with her usual crankiness. At the time, Rose thought she meant princess in a generally snarky way. "Well, we should try to remain consistent," Fauna said reasonably. "Are we raising her to be a lady or a girl in the woods? We never discussed that, really." "Oh, I don't know. That's a fair point," Flora said, putting a hand to her head. "She has so much natural grace and nobility. Let's discuss it further, but let her be for now." The young Briar Rose had latched on to the let her be part and had forgotten everything else. The older Aurora Rose grudgingly saw their dilemma. They had been raising a princess who didn't know she was one. Their little lessons and flights of fancy were starting to make sense, eating with the right utensil, when they had it, and the steps to a few court dances, the few things that the aunts thought made a princess, that the fairies thought made a human princess, fairies who really, until they remembered their task, let her run around naked and do what she wanted, because that was normal, for fairies. What if she had been raised in a castle? She wouldn't, as Philip said, have had what a little freedom she enjoyed in the woods. She wouldn't have hunted with foxes. Of course she would have had two loving human parents, maybe, who had at least had been all right, like Philip's, but nothing special. A prim kiss once a day before bed and after studies, who might have just passed time until a son came along. It was too much. Being hit with the memories, suddenly understanding them in a new context, almost sympathizing with those who had lied to her whole life. "Do you want me to carry you?" Philip asked, putting a hand on her shoulder. Aurora Rose cursed under her breath. It was taking all her effort to stay upright, and there was something coming out of her nose that she was pretty sure was blood. More than anything, she wanted to be carried the way her aunts had carried her when she was tired as a little girl, when she had played too hard or cried too much or just couldn't make it back to the cottage. She was exhausted and miserable and aching and in pain, and Philip, good old Philip, could easily take her the rest of the way and even enjoy it as penance for his previous sins. No. She set her jaw and kept walking. Philip didn't say anything. He just quietly kept pace with her. The path dipped unsteadily at what was either the state of an ancient creek bed or a spot where rain naturally collected when it rained down the hill. Topsoil gave way to pebbles and rocks and little sharp divots that was deceiving to the eye. She stumbled twice before they had gone more than 50 feet. With a burst of annoyance, she spread her fingers. If it was really her dream, her head, there would be a wide, smooth roads, cobbled and drained to where they needed to go, or at least well-packed dirt. The little rocks danced, and the sand shifted. Philip stopped, foot hanging in the air. At first he was unable to see the cause of the movements. His hand went tentatively to his sword. Aurora Rose frowned, concentrating. Why couldn't the ground see where it was supposed to go? Fill itself in. The rocks and sand and dirt acted like loudstones that didn't like each other, or raindrops on top of dry dust. They skittered around nervously, not wanting to go where she wanted them. The uneven places and holes remained. She shrieked with frustration. Philip risked putting a hand on her arm. "We're entering the deepest part of your mind, remember?" he said gently. "I don't think it's supposed to be easy to get to. It's a difficult path to who you really are." "Spare me more philosophy. I'm angry now." "Well, how about this? You're not Maleficent, who had hundreds of years to perfect her magic." The sound she made in response could have been either an animal annoyance or human acceptance of the logic in what he said. So they traveled more slowly. The path eventually opened to an ancient clearing. The trees thinned out, and a stream, which had been hiding shyly deeper in the forest, came close to them, rocky and gurgling. Gray stones emerged from the forest floor with moss and needles and even trees on top of them. They looked like they had just popped up their heads up for a few moments and looked around and would disappear back down any moment. "This is starting to feel familiar," the princess said cautiously. She shivered, but not in a good way. Finally, something was starting to make sense, to feel right. Philip wasn't paying attention to her, which was strange because he was always paying attention to her, even when she was being mean or distant or both. "Do you remember this? This is near where we met, isn't it?" She pushed, but he made a motion with his chin in the direction he was looking, which was not at her. Standing further up to the spot, as if she had always been there, was a little girl. She looked like a waif, maybe 6 years old, dressed in a grayish-pink shift that didn't cover her arms and fell thinly to her knees. An ugly, lopsided crown that looked like a child's drawing sat tilted on her head. Her feet were bare. She was as pale as a wisp of cloud, and dark half-moons rode beneath her startling violet eyes. She stood perfectly still. Not even a stray breeze ruffled her perfect blonde hair. Aurora felt cold horror creep its ugly fingers up to her back. The girl seemed perfectly calm. Complete stillness surrounded her like a heavy cloak. Although there were no clear shadows in the central eternal twilight of the ancient forest, everything seemed dimmer and grayer around her, as if bathed in gloom. She waited patiently for them to speak first. "Who are—" the princess began. "Kill it," Philip cried out, suddenly finding his voice. "It's a demon." Without a moment's hesitation, he rushed at the girl's sword out. Aurora Rose grabbed the prince, although she wasn't sure exactly why. It wasn't just because it was an unarmed, pretty little girl with long eyelashes that he was about to attack and run through with his blade. Philip was probably absolutely right that the girl was another one of Maleficent's demons. But there was something terribly familiar about her, about the air around her, the lack of color. The girl smiled faintly, watching them. "It's all right. He couldn't have touched me anyway." When she spoke, it was like there was no distance between them at all. Her voice sounded close to the princess's ear, like the girl knew she would always be heard by the right person. Philip clearly did not like her tone. Frankly, neither did Aurora Rose. She didn't stop the prince when he launched himself at the girl a second time. He was beautiful to watch, all grace and consummate skill, warmed up by the battle of his twin. The princess flinched, waiting for the thrust to the belly that would take the child down. But the girl flickered, like a candle about to go out. She was there, and not there, and then not there, and when Philip's sword would have connected with her flesh, she was suddenly a few feet away, in the same pose, with the same look on her face, as if she hadn't had to do anything, or even think, to go there. To his credit, Philip hesitated only a moment before spinning and lunging again. The girl flickered, appearing a few feet away. Philip spun around and slashed even faster than he had before. It didn't matter. They kept going at it, Philip attacking and the girl smiling and disappearing and reappearing and nothing else. Aurora Rose felt sick. None of the magic, nothing they had seen in the dream world before had looked anything like this. Finally, Philip fell back, exhausted. I told you, the girl said, not with a mocking tone, but one of infinite patience, which was somehow worse. You cannot touch me, Prince Philip. I do not intend to touch you, demon, he growled. I mean to run you through and keep your evil hands away from Rose. Ah, well, not everything in here is a demon, Prince Philip, or rather not all of the things in here are Maleficent's creations, the girl said, strangely adult sentences coming in her high, young voice. The prince and princess had matching expressions of confusion, which the girl obviously found amusing. Some things are from Aurora's own mind. The princess sucked in her breath. There was something resonant in that statement. The girl did not look exactly like her, but the crown. Or wait, is it Rose now? What is it, Rose or Aurora? What are you going by these days? The girl asked, brow furrowing in put-on seriousness. If you from my mind, you should know, Aurora Rose managed to say, trying to channel Philip's usual insolence. Ah, but you don't know, do you? The girl said. From your mind? What is she talking about? Philip demanded. Rose, what is she? What is this? All of her life had been inaction. All of her life had been waiting for people to do. Ever since she had escaped the Thorn Castle, she had known she wouldn't last much longer if she continued this way. Before she could talk to herself out of it, she threw her sword and attacked. She didn't question whether she could strike what looked very much like a young girl. She just screamed and threw herself at it. Unblinkingly, the girl watched the princess come at her. At that moment, she put her hands up. A small wooden sword appeared in it, a chunky plaything. When Aurora Rose brought her own sword down, the girl moved to deflect it. The princess's sword bounced off the wooden sword with an unreal booming sound. It echoed sickeningly off the trees. Her arms and upper body were shaking by the force of the rebound. She had been completely unprepared for how solid the girl and her sword were, but Aurora Rose gritted her teeth and swung again. The girl swung her sword and did a clumsy, childish parry and respite. The tip of her toy didn't reach anywhere near the princess's body. Aurora Rose raised her sword above her head, prepared to do the girl in, to cleave her head in half if she had to. The girl made a concerned ching sound. Are you sure you're up to this? The princess shook with the effort of holding the sword. It wasn't so big a thing, really. It was solid metal and above her head. She could feel the blood draining down her arm, into her shoulder, and it ached terribly. And what was the point? They couldn't kill the thing, whatever it was. Her sword fell to her side. Rose, kill it, Philip shouted. It's not a little girl. I know, she said dully. Don't feel bad, the girl said. You've only killed one other person, really. I'm not counting the Miss Sprite, because your boyfriend here helped you finish it off. Aurora Rose felt herself wilting. Person? The demon who looked like me was no person, Philip said quickly. It was another evil creature like yourself, whatever you may think you are. Honestly, you seem a little tired, the girl observed, looking at Aurora and ignoring the prince. The princess collapsed to the ground. It was kind of a relief. She didn't really want to kill the girl anyway, and the ground was safe and uncomfortable. The girl smiled sadly at her like a mother at an exhausted baby. Philip watched in confusion, but only for a moment. He took the opportunity to try to sneak attack, running up behind the girl, with the pommel of his sword raised to knock her on the head. The girl didn't even bother to look. She was suddenly a mirror image of herself, still turned to observe the princess, but now in the opposite angle. Philip fell over, with no plan in his head for stopping once he had engaged the girl. The girl stood there, looking mildly disappointed, both teenagers on the ground around her. Aurora Rose struggled up from the inviting ground. She had to do this. She had to. She was just so weak and battered, feeling and exhausted. No, stay there, really. You look like you could just use a little lie down, the girl said sweetly. The princess laid down with her head in the dirt, feeling waves of not caring wash over her. It was just like when she was a little girl. Rose! Philip cried. He leapt up. Rose, what are you doing? Get up! Leave her alone. Can't you see she's done in? The girl said with a mock impatience. Aurora Rose felt sluggish pour over her like molten lead from her feet to her shoulders. It was a dark, wintry day in either life, Thorncastle or Forest, when the sky was an ugly non-color and it was cold, but not the kind that made you want to bundle up and be comforted with a cup of hot tea. It was the kind of day when you would just lay unblinking and wished to die. "Rose, stop it! Get up! Why are you listening to her?" Philip demanded. "She's listening because I'm not telling her anything she doesn't already feel," the girl explained with a mysterious smile. "I'm not telling her to do anything she doesn't already want to do." "That's not true," Philip said, but he was hesitant. "Rose?" She picked up her weary head to look at him. She couldn't do much more than that. This really was what she wanted, to be left quietly, to rest, alone. Maybe it would be better for everyone just stop talking. "Behold, your true love," the girl said with perfect tiny white teeth. It was almost a hiss. "A directionless, indecisive, despondent, sad little girl." The princess wrapped her arms around her legs, each word dripping acid into her ears. It felt strangely good.